Good day to you. It is a Tuesday, the 17th of June. We're approaching the summer solstice, and a galactic just completed its 1000th video presentation in 3 years. This station began exactly 3 years ago this month, and we've reached the end. We have a special presentation today because we are going to begin on a new series which is a continuation of what we've been doing. If you're tuning in for the first time, this station originally was intended to broadcast in a public way a new discovery. As I claim, this is hypothetical until it passes consensual review. This is part of the process of science. But on my own recognizance, as every potential discoverer must do, you have to step out and see if you can share your discovery. Without which, it is only at the most a partial discovery. Perhaps I discovered something that only I will ever know. It's probably fair to say that there's a large group of discoveries that don't quite make it because some mistake was made. And that's part of the process of science. It's not meant to be cruel, but in distinguishing truth from falsehood, one must be rigorous. So the original intent of this production platform was simply to present spherical geometry. Now, just to give a brief outline, perhaps under 2 minutes if I can manage it, spherical trigonometry has been known for over 2 millennia, where you use the right angle law to capitalize on the natural orthogonality of two lines on a plane in order to begin computations for even conic figures, which would be the usual ellipse, parabola, hyperbola, and of course the circle. You can also derive a straight line. All the natural objects appear in what is called a conic. Now over here, you'll see some rather interesting curlicues, it looks like, some curves. Those are all natural curves. They're called cubics, cubic equations. These are third power equations. You probably know that celestial mechanics is based on squared numbers. And that's quite interesting to consider because extrinsic geometry uses squares on the plane. What I discovered is that it is entirely reasonable to reparameterize the plane without using a straight line. This would be to begin with a circle. Today we're going to be approaching several of the topics that I've covered over the past 3 years on a range of topics that quite exceed that of just pure geometry. We won't be going into that kind of detail. That was the purpose of the last 1000 videos, was to expose another geometry, which it turns out is closed, complete, consistent, coherent, and computable. That's everything. The circle is a natural planar object. You can immediately discern, just using your internal visual perceptual space, which is somewhat like a blackboard, but it is possible to manipulate it with your mind so as to construct what is currently called 3D space. In other words, you can imagine in your mind depth. It's a very interesting concept. It extends the plane with a third orthogonal line. And that has proved to be miraculously good for humans in terms of being able to make constructions on Earth, including engineering. We also have spaceflight, which is quite a miraculous accomplishment. The ability to navigate outside the bound of Earth gravity, proceeding outward, to navigate to the outer planets is quite a, I would have to put it, one of the most amazing aspects of human development is our ability to traverse space, first with probes and then with manned missions. That is a very dicey operation, even to the present day. Now, currently, it's more or less pedestrian, as although that's quite a metaphor to say pedestrian. The ISS, the International Space Station, at this moment is circling the Earth, and the inhabitants of that craft are quite comfortable considering they are disconnected from the ecology. There have been tragedies in spaceflight, and even the Americans had a rather bad experience on the ground when some of our astronauts were trapped inside of an oxygen-filled test capsule and unfortunately lost their lives in that fire. We have not lost a man in outer space. The Soviet Union has lost more than one man in outer space. Naturally, they tried to discount that, but it was rather difficult to hide completely. So all of this is to say that science has been progressive quite a bit from the days of Euclid. Euclid began with a line, but if you have read Elements, you know that that is not how he began. He began with a point, and that has become the subject of some very high-level cogitation, lucubration, mathematical inquest into the nature of the null point, which has no dimensions. And so even though Euclid was not thinking of the number 0, which would not be officially discovered for centuries after his time, he essentially invented 0. Because it's implicit, he said the point has no length, height, or breadth, meaning the 3 natural linear dimensions. That is an extrinsic geometry, because it's a scaffolding over space. So it's a grid. You might say to yourself, well, in the 20th century we discovered that everything in the universe at all scales is spherical, and there are no squares, and there are no cubes. There are no straight lines, technically, and there certainly is no such thing as a point. A point must be used to compute distance, and Euclid was certainly correct in saying that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. I have discovered that that is actually a derivative, and the first clue that opened up this new field of geometry was Einstein's proof that a straight line distance is an illusion. It is essentially a photograph where your photograph is not capturing reality. And the reason for that introduces our topic today, space-time. We'll be talking about the space-time grid, which is a 4D grid, but it's still hypercubic. And therefore the concept of position is still thought to be based on the concept of a point, which can be computed using an extrinsic geometry called linear systematic space. Excuse me. I need a little bit of water here. It's quite hot here. Today, we will not be talking strictly about the geometry which I claim to have discovered, which is based on the binary number system, which is a subset of the rational numbers. that can easily be visualized, but we won't do it today because I've already done it so many times. I do want to mention, though, for the sake of continuity on your behalf, that you have tuned into a station that deals with geometry. And it is geometry. But it is not trigonometry. So that sums up that aspect. That is all I wanted to broadcast 3 years ago. However, I began these YouTube uploads. I had already begun making videos at home, but I was considering YouTube because it is a public dissemination platform, which would save me the strict necessity of writing a scientific paper, which of course I've looked into. And I still intend to write that paper, but I am no longer seriously concerned with that because I've learned to very much enjoy video presentation for several reasons. You may guess at some, but one of the explicit reasons that I chose YouTube, I did not upload any of the couple of hundred videos that I had made just to practice, really just to lecture to myself, because I actually learned from my own lectures. This has been a discovery vector, but just the geometry would just be a plaything, just a game, perhaps, with no real practical value, unless somebody could discover a practical use of spherical geometry. I suspected that that was going to happen. It was an intuition, but I consciously chose to start a YouTube platform, a channel out here on YouTube, because I suspected that this was going to lead to some discoveries in physics, which it did. And now I'm at the end of that process. Science does not really end, it's continuous, and I fully expect to continue to make discoveries. Over the past couple of weeks, as I have gone through I'll call it a transition time, it has occurred to me that since this discovery process is showing no signs of slowing down, it is actually accelerating, that I need to regroup, and I have decided to do so. That is to restart the machine, kickstart the machine, without going back over my two axiomatic proofs called the bootstrap theorem and the antipodal theorem. Instead of beginning with the re-axiomatization of the plane or the introduction of the world's first coherent number system, rather than going into the nuts and bolts, which I've done, I believe, successfully. It's all in my videos, which need to be indexed so they're accessible. You would have to guess which video from the title would have the information that you would want if you were interested in completely understanding what I discovered, which is not difficult and does not take advanced mathematics at all. In fact, I have managed to gain rather profound insights into the calculus and complex numbers. Just to sum up a whole field of mathematics, those two tools were absolutely essential for the Industrial Revolution, whereby humanity learned how to engineer machines on Earth capable of capturing the power of electricity, for instance, and I believe you realize we've gone on into the 20th century to discover fission energy and fusion energy, the use of laser technology, and what I believe is called cryogenic, where you have very interesting phenomena occurring at close to absolute zero. Some rather interesting phenomena can be found out from exploring that part of science. In the meantime, in the 20th century, in the first quarter of the 20th century, really around 1926, you could put a date on it, there began two explorations into two unknown realms which are spherically opposite. The very tiniest things, you'd have to say things because now we're approaching the quantum paradox, but the electron was discovered, the proton was discovered, and the photon was mathematized. It is a peculiar particle, and it could be called a particle, but this again goes to the quantum paradox. At the other end of the spheric spectrum, where instead of looking in to find the tiniest things, we look out to the edge to see how far we can probe. As you're perfectly aware, I'm sure, the James Webb Telescope is parked in a Lissajous orbit at Lagrangian point number 2 in the Earth-Moon two-body system in order to train its sub-infrared balanced photographic equipment to take the most exquisite photos of deep space that have ever been revealed to the mind of man. We have more than just optical telescopy now. We're using X-ray and infrared and ultraviolet. There are several forms of telescopic exploration whereby we have now composite images of such mighty macroscale objects as galaxies. Galaxies are an extraordinary field of study. That is how I got into astronomy. I bypassed the stars. Astronomers do love stars for very good reason. Some star clusters, you just have to see them to even believe anything could be so beautiful. But for me, just speaking for myself, although I'm not alone, when you see a spiral galaxy, in some of these high-resolution composite photographs especially, and then you see interacting galaxies, and perhaps you are already aware of what my teacher discovered in the 1950s, the third cosmic unit, the luminous objects that make the universe. The first is the star, but stars make galaxies, but galaxies make one more object, after which there are no more stellar objects, that is, extended stellar objects. A galaxy is called an extended object because it's mostly made of stars. Now, you can have an object composed of galaxies, on exactly the same principle, really, as galaxies are composed of stars. So galaxy clusters, which I call cumuli, just taking a clue from Hubble, who always called galaxies nebulae, because that was the ancient term. But galaxies are the second cosmic unit because they're made of stars, and so they're luminous because of the stars. And then we get cumuli, which are approximately 100 to 1,000 galaxies, and it is safely said, and has been said, there are approximately, on the average, 300 bright, that's a relative term, but 300 relatively bright galaxies in a cluster. No one is quite sure how many galaxies go into a cluster because, as Fritz Zwicky showed, there is an attenuation in size, and there's actually a whole list of smaller and smaller galaxies where they have to be given some adjectival prefix such as dwarf galaxy and even pygmy galaxy, and there is something called a gnome galaxy. Well, I suppose if you kept going, you could have the leprechaun galaxy, the little people of the galaxy kingdom. But nobody is quite sure what is the cutoff for the smallest galaxy, and that persists to this day, although we continue to make progress. So I've covered a lot of ground here in the first 20 minutes. What we're going to talk about today will begin essentially a new series And here is a thumbnail sketch of what I mean by this new series. I have reached a logical terminus. Always a bit dicey to say that, but benchmarks are important, just the way humans think, certainly the way I think. You do have to kind of do something with a spectrum, because from beginning to end, there should be something happening along the way. It's kind of like the particle wave duality thing, because a wave is continuous. It should go like this, right? But a particle is discrete. So which is which? It's very difficult to say with the photon. It's part of the paradox. But what I'm trying to say in terms of this new series is that I personally, and I must be very cautious how I phrase this because I don't want you to be alarmed at some megalomaniac aspect to my speech. But I have reached the end of my studies in quantum mechanics and astrophysics to a threshold. That's a very good phrase to get used to saying. Because when you say you've reached a conclusion in science, it's never true. But it's always true if you add the clause, to a threshold. Okay. So we do have space-time, so we do understand space much better than did Newton, to a new threshold. Extremely important to bear in mind that science is never over. It can't be, or we'd be gods. Okay. Now, I don't want to get into philosophy, but actually, in this synthetic stage of science, philosophy is unavoidable. It should be carefully controlled by those who discourse into the range of philosophy. But these days, I think we all can agree, it's getting rather difficult to avoid philosophy. The famous confrontation between Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein is not yet fully solved, and each of them had a different philosophy. Because we can't solve the paradox. It cannot be solved, that I proved that. Now, the only way that I could have proved that the quantum paradox cannot be solved is to state precisely where our system breaks such that the solution will never be found. I discovered that, I claim. It's the linear number system itself. Simply because it's cubic, or on the plane, it's squared. It's extrinsic, so it's a scaffolding over spherical space. And I did prove, to a threshold, that the universe is spherical. There is a footnote to just about everything at this level. But now, I wish to introduce what I intend to pursue with you. This is communal, consensual, communicative science, which is redundant. That is what science is. It's a group effort. And a group effort of men has a very serious pitfall which we have encountered. I've gone into that in some detail. It actually caused me a bit of trouble because of the involvement of my emotions in analyzing the situation in communal, consensual, communicative science. We have met our own enemy. It is man himself that creates a group mind which, after at least one generation, I am willing to say, the group mind obtains an entity form all its own, which now cannot be controlled. in the case of a group mind. Let me remind you that a government, any government, is a group mind, correct? And I think we know what happens when we allow a group with a group mind to gain independence. In other words, it can no longer be controlled. And that leads to the situation we see in the world today, which, just to put a little bit of medicine onto a very, very distasteful portrait, to mix some metaphors there, it's been like that since the beginning of human history. As far back as we can see into history, where we at least have some form of written record, that's about 6,000 years of that kind of history, although it's really dwindles quite quickly after about 4,000 years. We do have records that indicate what humanity was like that long ago. There were slaves. I don't need to say any more. The governments were already brutal. They were already out of control. And it's been like that to the present day, and now we are certain. Certainly David Bohm was certain, I believe, that it can't be fixed. There's no way to save humanity now. It's too late. That does not really affect us in science, but it did affect David Bohm. This series that I'm beginning now will be focused on the work of the greatest quantum mechanist of all time. Albert Einstein said that. Albert Einstein considered Dave Bohm to be his godson and said that David was his successor. Albert Einstein's successor is David Bohm. A most interesting life. I'm reading a book which you can get for free out on the internet and read it yourself as well, which is about the life of David Bohm. Extraordinarily worth reading to find out what David Bohm did in his scientific career that brought him into correspondence and direct contact with Albert Einstein, who knew David extremely well. They knew each other. David Bohm also worked with Robert Oppenheimer, who headed the Trinity Project, as you know, Los Alamos Project, to build the world's first fission bomb, which was successfully tested by roasting alive tens of thousands of innocent Japanese civilians to end the war in World War II in the Pacific after Hitler had been defeated by the Soviet armies. So, we have quite a history that is intimately connected with scientific history. David Bohm, because he was involved with Robert Oppenheimer, and because David Bohm for 9 months had been a member of the Communist Party during World War II, at a time when people were still unaware of what communism actually was. It did offer a lot of promise. It was essentially an offer of the American way of life to Russians in the way it actually fell out. Better than America, because it would not use capitalism in the same predatory sense as was invoked in America, essentially destroying the system of freedom itself. So Russia was supposed to be the answer to the failed experiment in America. And a lot of men believed the rhetoric of Karl Marx. Whether Karl Marx himself was lying is somewhat moot. But the instigators of the Russian Revolution of course, were nothing but liars. And as soon as the population, which had been traduced because of World War I, and the czarist system of serfdom was certainly nobody's idea of fun, the communist group called the Bolsheviks won out. First under Vladimir Lenin, for a while under Leon Trotsky, which is not his name, and Joseph Stalin, which is not his name. That's where it ended. In 1953, finally, Stalin died, after having murdered 100 million whites. 100 million, that's just the tip of an iceberg. Communism eventually came to dominate the lives of billions of people, none of whom benefited from it. It was entirely a terrorist operation, as we now know. It's not over. However, in order to understand the further developments in the world of global politics, you and I cannot address that. I have, because I have vital insights into that. However, they're worthless unless you just want to know how the world will end. Many people are curious. I certainly was curious enough to find out. But to return to our topic of David Bohm, David Bohm developed a model for the quantum mechanical paradoxical system that is unique. It's not the Copenhagen school, and it's none of the others. It's not even the Einsteinian school, although Einstein very much appreciated David Bohm's approach, and we're going to talk about that extensively and listen to segments of interviews with David, who wrote a book, which I have right here, called Quantum Theory. This came out in 1951, a second edition in 1952, basically to clear it up. It's over 600 extremely dense pages long. It is now considered by Einstein himself, as well as anyone who's amenable to that philosophy, that it is the finest book on technical, mathematical quantum mechanics ever written. Nobody, not even Paul Dirac, got what David got. Only it's completely unique. Nobody thought of what David thought of. And David went on to meet with several religious institutions worldwide in order to discuss what he considered to be a brand new view of reality based on the extrapolation of quantum paradoxicality. I wish to introduce this series and then close this lecture off at 40 minutes, just so you know what we're going to get into. A man named Lord Kelvin, that's an English title, his actual name was Thomson, very famous. Of course, I'm sure you've heard of Thomson if you're into physics. He made a most interesting statement way back when all of this was exfoliating, much of it under the aegis of Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and Schrödinger and Dirac. But Lord Kelvin made a most interesting statement, and his life is worth knowing about. He was a devout believer in the Creator, which makes him one of the last. David Bohm himself was an agnostic, which for a scientist is fairly safe. For the same reason I say that of my father. My fleshly father was an agnostic. That is not an atheist. An agnostic is someone who prefers not to get involved in that subject at all, without divulging what's inside their heart or mind or soul or spirit. They prefer to say to other human beings, when the subject of a deity comes up, as of course it will in a normal life, is to nolo contendere, no opinion. But as you're probably aware, there is a tremendous group mind movement which really began to form itself in the 1960s when I was just entering school. And this group mind is atheist. Atheist is not agnostic. I mention this because David Bohm received an audience with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama befriended David Bohm and wrote the preface to David's book, one of them. David wrote several books. This one is unreadable except for the first chapter, I'll say the first section, which is by far the best formulation of quantum mechanics for a layman, a beginner, a non-mathematician, perhaps a person who is otherwise adverse to science in its worst sense. David cuts through the you-know-what and tells you why it can't be solved. It cannot be solved. You may ask, what cannot be solved? I can tell you from a unique point of view just what is the quantum paradox, which is actually a system of paradoxes, but conveniently, for our own convenience, we must boil it down to some single statement. That's extremely difficult to do. The way that I managed to do that was to solve it. I solved it. There is no more quantum paradox for me. None of it is mysterious in the slightest degree. I know everything there is to know about quantum mechanics that physics would love to know. But do they? No. And nobody will ever want to know what I know. That caused me quite an interesting journey. I live alone, and I've lived alone for 16 years since my wife died. And this means that I have no feedback system. I don't. I have no friends. Well, I have friends, but they're elsewhere, and it doesn't really help. In terms of being a well-balanced man, I believe that I am now back to normal, but I wasn't normal for much of this year. There were extenuating circumstances. I didn't really do anything wrong. However, I was beginning to harm myself because of what I just told you, which I won't extrapolate upon. But I did need to regroup, consolidate, take a new look at what I claim to have discovered, to look at my 1,000 videos in some coherent way to make more sense out of what I have been exploring. Now that I've discovered the quantum of gravity, solving that problem, and have discovered how to solve the collapse of the wave function, explain entanglement, and explain superposition, and my original goal, to explain light propagation, the transmission of energy across free space. I have that answer. And in combination with the discovery of the quantum of gravity, and the true solution to the entire quantum paradoxical system. I also achieved the unified field solution that Einstein was seeking. I also solved the problem that Paul Adrien Maurice Dirac assigned to himself and failed at. He failed, so did Einstein, so did Feynman, so did all the physicists since Bohr. And Bohr also failed. There have been no successes. I got it. I got the unified field solution, which is what? The inclusion of gravity into the electromagnetic force system of the universe so that gravity is fully explained by electrodynamics. I got that. In process, I discovered what is essentially driving everyone bonkers about reality, and David Bohm is the only man who can join me to add a voice to my discovery sequence. I have made dozens of major breakthrough discoveries in astrophysics and subatomic physics. I have all the answers. And that's where we begin in this new series on David Bohm. So the first piece you'll see here is David Bohm, and then you'll see Einstein and Bohm. I'll be talking about their relationship, very friendly. Einstein was not friendly with Niels Bohr. They essentially hated each other. Einstein and Bohm were very good friends, and that is unique. The third line down, Bohm and John S. Bell, the Irishman, who made one of the most important discoveries in the mathematical and physical basis of quantum mechanics because he devised a test for transluminality. And it was discovered later, and it even received a Nobel Prize in 2022, the discovery of transluminal signaling. That is, of course, hotly debated to this day, but Bell gave the ability to test for what Einstein called hidden variables. And Bell ruled it out if a test could be performed to see if the signal travels faster than light. That was one of the most difficult experiments ever performed, and it was tried over a period of over 3 decades. But today, just 3 years after 2022, it has been declared that Einstein was fucked in the head. I am here to tell you, no, he wasn't. So all of your physicists are wrong. On the fourth line down, David Bohm met with the Dalai Lama, had numerous extended conversations. The Dalai Lama, joining Einstein, said of David Bohm that Bohm was his scientific guru, a man apparently devoid of the evils that a scientist is prey to. Humble, very good man, according to the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist sect, of which my sister is a member, by the way. Just threw that in. On the fifth line down, we have a unique view of quantum mechanics. I'm speaking of David Bohm. He also didn't get the mathematic and geometric solution. I did. On the sixth line down, what Bohm essentially called his discovery is the implicit order. We'll be talking about that extraordinarily deeply because he got the philosophical solution. And on the final line, books and interviews. These are about David Bohm or by David Bohm. We will be studying David Bohm's system, whereunto I will be adding my geometric and mathematic solutions so that you will see that I got it. And I am now Bohm's successor. This is Anagalactic, bringing you the secrets of the universe. I hope you're entranced, enthralled, or at least you're a scientist who's open to the truth. If for any reason you find my approach or me or anything about what I say, logically or not, if you find it disagreeable, may you go in peace, but you will never talk back to me, because I don't have much time. This is Anagalactic, bringing you the secrets of the universe. We'll be talking about those cubic equations over there somewhat when we get to the Boshkovich force curve system, which I fully understand, and I'm the first man since Roger Boshkovich to understand his work, and far beyond his work. I am the successor to Newton and Leibniz, who are gone from the picture because all of their work was fully understood by Boshkovich, who got the right answer. Newton was wrong. Leibniz never even got close, but he got another angle on the problem. But when those two men died, Boshkovich was the only physicist left in Europe of any quality. During his whole lifetime, he was alone. Nobody understood what he said. Nobody did. But Faraday caught on. So did Tesla. And it is now understood. So did Einstein. It's just that Einstein never mentioned what he learned. And I think that's true of a lot of the physicists. They knew something about Boshkovich's work, because Boshkovich discovered the Bohr atom geometry before Niels Bohr was born by over a century. I know what even Boshkovich did not know. I have the mathematics and geometry to prove it. This will blow your mind more than once. So stay tuned if you want the truth out of science. Keep looking up. We'll be back, I hope, this evening when it cools off to give you some more. But I could produce easily another 1,000 videos. That will not be the case because I don't have enough time. But I will try to produce the most cogent, incisive, precisely good videos on the nature of reality in this universe, the force balance system that explains everything, to give you the ability to achieve supervision and super intelligence, super insight, so that you can fulfill your own equation, whatever it is. Thank you very much.